Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today we'll be going through the fight of Luffy versus Kaido to see who's really stronger. Now, the reason I've decided to make this video is because I've been seeing a lot of people trying to make the case that Luffy only won the fight against Kaido because Kaido was in a weakened state, and thus that if the fight were to be done with both of them in an absolutely fresh condition, Kaido would win. So I thought I'd actually go through the full fight to see if this claim actually holds up. And throughout the different stages of this fight, I'll be referencing the characters' overall conditions as a numeric percentage of their overall or best condition. Now note, this is just an approximation that I'll be doing to make this video easier to understand. Do not get caught up in specific numbers. But with that understood, let's get into it. Now, the first fact that usually gets brought up is that Kaido was fighting with the scabbards before he began fighting Luffy. So the argument is that he had received a significant amount of damage before his battle with Luffy even started. However, let us take a look at what actually happened. So chapter 987 was the first instance where the scabbards began waging their war against Kaido, and this initial interaction actually set the tone for their entire fight. You see, even though they all jumped Kaido together, none of them could actually do any real significant damage to this human form Kaido. Like, yes, Kiku was able to pierce through Kaido's hand, but for the most part that was wholly irrelevant for the entire arc. And we see where Kiemon, while trying to pierce Kaido with all his might, could only do a superficial wound. Raizo even had double katanas right at Kaido's neck, and it seemingly did absolutely no damage. Like, Kaido seemed to have taken much more damage from his PTSD flashbacks about Oden than he got from the actual scabbards. So to say that this initial interaction had any significant or long-lasting effect on Kaido literally makes no sense. Then, on the rooftop where the fighting continued, we see where the scabbards were able to do a little more damage to Kaido. Kiemon seemed to have been able to make him bleed from the initial flame-rendering slash. Dogstorm was able to do a superficial piercing wound, and Kawamatsu, who is probably the most powerful of them all, also made Kaido bleed. However, again, what was absolutely the most telling part of this rooftop fight is that 4 of the scabbards came together to do a combined attack on Kaido's weakest point, that is his old scar. And do you know what Kaido said to them after this combined attack? He said that you scabbards are so weak that you do not have enough power to open up my old scar. So yes, the fight did continue after this, and other characters like Denjiro were able to do more superficial damage. But again, that is all it was. Superficial damage. Like, do not get me wrong, the scabbards are very powerful characters. Like, remember, a post-Whole Cake Island Luffy, who we know was at least on Katakuri's level, even while in Gear 4, could not do any damage to Kaido. So these scabbards being able to do even the superficial damage that they did is a tremendous feat that most people in the One Piece fandom quite frankly don't appreciate enough. But to think that all damage is significant damage is just quite silly. It was highlighted throughout the fight that all the scabbards could do were superficial wounds. Kaido's overall condition obviously was not significantly affected by this. And remember, it's not like Luffy came exactly after the fight ended. Like, Kaido had some time to be chilling on the rooftop with Big Mom, drinking alcohol, while Zeus recharged on lightning. So again, in actuality, when you consider what was actually shown, the scabbards had a negligible effect on Kaido's overall condition. And this interaction, even when stacked onto everything else that follows, would in no way have a significant effect on the Luffy versus Kaido fight. However, for the sake of this video, let us overestimate the scabbards and assume they were able to bring Kaido down to 95%. So when Luffy appeared, Luffy was at 100% and Kaido was at 95%. Now, at the initial stage of this rooftop fight of Kaido and Big Mom versus the worst gen, the initial significant hits that Kaido received were Luffy's initial Red Rock, Luffy's Gear 4 Gatling of punches, Killer's Slither Sonic attack, Law's Gamma Knife directly to his heart, and Zoro's Dragon Twister. Now, there may have been more off-screen, but those are the ones that were shown. And of course, I left out Law dropping rocks on him because that obviously would not do anything, and whether Kid crushing him had an effect was not made clear. But after all those attacks, what was Kaido like? Well, he was just laughing it off with Big Mom. Kid even said that their attacks felt as if they weren't doing anything at all. And the Conqueror's awakened Luffy later on in the fight acknowledged that all these prior attacks that he was doing with Armament Haki Internal Destruction were too weak to do any significant damage. So again, I think a lot of people made the mistake of thinking that all damage is significant damage, but that is just not the case. But again, let us overestimate the crew and assume they dropped Kaido by 10%, thus bringing Kaido down to 85% of his max condition. However, what about Luffy? Because remember, Kaido was not the only one receiving damage. Luffy was receiving damage too. So firstly, it seems that a lot of people have forgotten, but Gear 4 actually takes quite a toll on Luffy. So after Luffy went all out at the start of their fight, doing a barrage of punches with this new internal destruction haki that he had just learned, and Kaido just tanked them, predictably, Luffy was incapacitated for 10 minutes. Like again, put this into perspective. At the start of the fight, Luffy's stamina went to 0. Kaido was never even close to such a condition at this point. And when Luffy got some rest, obviously he wouldn't just go back to 100%. And you could easily see it on his face. Like while Kaido and Big Mom appeared completely fine, the worst generation members seemed like they were fighting a war for days. After being tossed around, Luffy even compared just this initial start of this fight to the various hells he had experienced before. So you cannot reasonably argue that this Luffy was in a better condition than Kaido. But again, for the sake of this video, let us do exactly that and say that Luffy at this point had only dropped by 10% and thus was at 90% compared to Kaido, who we said was at 85%. So now, exactly after this, we see where two very important attacks happened. So one of these attacks was Zoro doing a Conqueror's Infused Ashura that was so powerful that Kaido said it was going to give him a permanent scar. Now at this point, this was without a doubt the most powerful attack that Kaido had received since this battle started. And this was without a doubt an attack that did significant damage. Remember, the only other person who had ever managed to give Kaido a scar was Oden, so there is no doubt that this hurt quite a bit. However, remember, immediately prior to this attack on Kaido, Luffy also received a significant attack from Kaido, specifically Kaido's Ragnarok. And remember, in comparison to Kaido, who after taking Zoro's attack was still standing and performing quite well, Luffy after taking Ragnarok was completely knocked out. Again, remember, the reason Zoro had to do Ashura in the first place was to save this completely knocked out Luffy from Kaido, who was planning to gouge out his eyes or crush his heart or skull. So yet again, at this point, to say that Kaido had undergone more relative damage than Luffy or was in a worse condition than Luffy makes absolutely no sense. Like after Luffy got back up, there is no way you can argue that Luffy was in a better condition than Kaido. But yet again, for the sake of this video, let us overestimate Luffy and assume he only dropped by 20% and Kaido only dropped by 15%. So both of them are now at an overall of 70%. Now of course, the fight continued with Luffy's new Conqueror's Infusion power-up, and it was shown that Luffy got a few good shots in against Kaido, but most of this round was off screen. However, yet again, Kaido completely knocked out Luffy and was just standing around just chilling. And remember, this was a Kaido who by his own admission had not been going all out. In his own words, even at this point, he had only gotten a little excited. So to say that Kaido had been pushed far or was in a very deteriorated condition, while we know he was still even holding back quite a bit, again, that makes no sense. Luffy, on the other hand, we know for a fact had been going all out since he came to the rooftop, and this was now the second time he had been knocked out by Kaido after just being knocked out a short while ago without getting any significant rest. And remember, this was on the back of him reaching a stamina of 0 after going all out in Gear 4 at the literal start of the fight. So yes, after this, Kaido was being kept occupied by Yamato, and Luffy did get a small respite where he got something to eat. However, this in still no way makes up for the difference in relative damage that Luffy had been receiving up to this point. And we do not even have to guess about this, because after Luffy got back up, even though Kaido was getting weaker, as evidenced by the fact that his flame clouds were becoming unstable, Yamato literally tells us that Luffy could barely stand. So we not only have all of the literal fighting up to this point, clearly showing us who is in the much worse state, but we were even given dialogue literally telling us that Luffy is in a way worse state than Kaido. But again, for the sake of this video, let us say that both of them dropped from 70 to 50%. So they're still equal. Now, the fight continued with Luffy's new Emperor's level Conqueror's infusion, and they both got some pretty good hits in on each other. Now, we technically never got to see the end of this matchup, because when Luffy and Kaido were going to do their final move, there was an interruption causing Luffy to lose. However, again, we know that Luffy would have lost, because even Gear 5 base Luffy is way stronger than over Kongon Gear 4 Luffy, and it took a Bajrangan Luffy, which is exponentially stronger than even Gear 5 base Luffy, to take Kaido down. But needless to say, with this loss before Gear 5, Luffy was not only completely knocked out, but rather this time, he also literally died. Like a combatant's overall status cannot possibly get any lower than literal death. And I mean, even before Luffy died, Luffy literally said that the attack he was about to do was his last. Kaido, on the other hand, never made such a claim about himself, and while Luffy was on his last legs, Kaido was shown to be having fun against Luffy, beseeching Luffy to show him what he can do. And I mean, remember, after defeating Luffy, Kaido was ready to clean up anyone who challenged him, and we know he also then went on to fight Gear 5 Luffy after Luffy came back to life. So at every stage of this fight, it is just a demonstrable fact that Luffy had always been receiving more relative damage than Kaido, and was always the one in a way worse state than Kaido. Like, this is just not something that can be disputed. However, where it seems like a lot of people are diverging is the fact that upon awakening, Luffy was resurrected from the dead and appeared as if he was fully healed. So a lot of people are making the claim that Kaido, who we can say dropped from about 50 to 30% his max status, was now fighting a resurrected Luffy that was also fully healed up to 100% his max status. So the case being made is that Luffy isn't actually stronger than Kaido for beating him, but rather it was just due to the difference in their overall status at this last stage of their fight. Now, this argument is kind of silly, given that it ignores the actual reality that was shown in this fight. So let me explain. We know that Luffy was not fully healed after being resurrected. You see, Gear 5 doesn't actually heal you fully. It just makes you able to fight as if you were healed. So for example, in the fight with Kaido, we saw where using Gear 5 for just a short while, Luffy changed to a state where he was not only depleted of stamina, but it actually seemed as if he had undergone accelerated aging. This was without a doubt the worst state we've seen Luffy in since the beginning of the fight. And Luffy said himself that it was taking a lot out of him, and agreed with Kaido that he was on the verge of death. But by altering his heartbeat, he was able to continue fighting in his perky Gear 5 state as if he was fully healed. But again, by Luffy's own words, we know that the damage and fatigue that Luffy had received from Kaido in Gear 5 and the energy requirements for Gear 5 didn't just disappear because he appears fully healthy. No, it was shown and stated that he was fighting while bearing those costs. And for those of you who actually pay attention to dialogue, after Luffy was resurrected, you'll note that what he said was that he can fight for a little longer. Such a dialogue would not make any sense if he were fully healed. A little longer implies that Luffy was, like he had been all throughout his entire fight, and like you would expect a person who had literally just died, was barely holding on. So again, at every stage of this fight, Luffy is actually in a way worse condition than Kaido. And even with this, when both of them decided to clash their strongest attacks against each other, Luffy unequivocally overpowered Kaido and won the fight. So no, it doesn't matter if the fight was redone, with both of them starting from a completely fresh state. Current Luffy, who remember now, even while at base, is acknowledged by Kaido as a strong enough opponent to take seriously using his drunken hybrid form state. This current Luffy would still win the fight, and arguably with a far greater ease. But anyway, that's the video guys, and there's some other stuff that I could have brought up that skews this even further in favor of Luffy. However, I like to keep my videos as simple as possible, but you may disagree with the conclusion of this video. So let me know what you thought in the comment section down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked the video. But anyway, see you guys next time.